Well, we are back with another episode of Walking Through Blank, where we talk about different subjects and different trials that many of us have walked through, but we don't really talk about in the church. And I am very excited for today's episode because it's been one that I have been wanting to do for a long time. And today we are talking about walking through church hurt. And for many of us in the church, I would say probably the majority of us have experienced church hurt and have somehow or in some way been wounded by the church, and it has caused a lot of pain for many of us and has become something that has just been a hindrance. And it's not something we talk about a lot, so I'm very excited to have Robin and Tony here with me today, and they're going to be sharing their story of church hurt. But I want to start off by saying, Tony, your mustache. 10 out of 10. I had to acknowledge it. Everyone's thinking it, so I just thought I'd put words to it. But thank you guys so much for being here and for being willing to share your story with me. So what is your story? What have you walked through?
Well, I think back in 2016, I went through a really bad depression. It got bad enough that my doctor recommended that I do ECT treatments, electroconvulsive shock treatment, which I really wasn't, I didn't know the details of it. Before this depression, we had adopted a little girl. After we got back, that seems to be when the depression started. But anyway, so I went with the ECTs, and what I didn't know was going to happen was that I would end up losing most of 3 years of memory. He's figured up that there's chunks leading up to 12 years previous to ECTs. So during that time, I had lost cognitive functioning abilities, sense of direction, or knowing how to go to a bank or go through a bank drive-through and deposit a check. And so, but what happened was during this time of ECTs with our daughter, Andrea, I had taken her to a specialist for her allergies, and the nurse came in and she asked me, she was confused as to why I was there. She let me know that I had already been there previously, and there were different ways, medications, different ways I should have been caring for Andrea that I had no idea. And I think it was at that moment, and then considering everything else I was dealing with, trying to care for myself, that we began to pray about finding a home for Andrea, which was, of course, an extremely difficult decision as parents. She had special needs. In the moment, I had special needs, and it was really difficult to care for her. But in the end, when we went to find Andrea a home, the family was there. They could not have children of their own, and they wanted her immediately. And so Andrea is with the perfect family for her. I believe that God, He knew the outcome. And we're grateful that we got to be a part of Andrea's story, that she is loved and cared for, and she loves them back. And so, as difficult as that was, it's been a beautiful story to see unfold. And it's still hard for me to talk about. It's just a painful time. But it was the right decision. But I think the shift at church, I really think it came with the ECTs. I think they didn't know how to handle that. I didn't know how to handle that. And there was just a shift in attitude towards us. And I think I'm guessing we had been there 4 or 5 years. And I had been on the worship team, but I just started seeing, just a different response towards me, and at first I brushed it off, but then it became more and more. I approached the worship pastor and just trying to make things right. But he didn't have a desire to sit down and have a conversation with us. And so then eventually I was informed that I was done. You know, we never got to the actual reasoning.
At that point, we were still in the church. And it was very strange. All of a sudden, our Sunday school teacher, who was also one of the associate pastors there at the church, I had contacted him and just wanted to talk through some of this that was going on with Robin and myself. But I got zero response back from the email. Tried to contact him again, still nothing. And it was almost like they had just completely just kind of turned their backs on us. You know, at that point, I think the hurt was so deep. I was done with church, done completely with church, and had made up my mind that I would never step foot in another church again. I would occasionally, begrudgingly go with her to visit another church here or there, and I think it was just not the fact that it was just a couple of people in the church. It was the pastors and staff that had kind of turned their backs on us. When we moved back to Bristol, we hesitantly visited several churches and visited Celebration. And then we would gravitate back to Celebration. And finally we discussed it one night and said, hey, before we go any further with this, I want to know how we'll be received if our story is told. And so, we went to pastor. He assured us that, you know, everyone's welcome, you know, no matter what hurts or things that you've had in the past. And it was that week or the next week, his sermon it was almost like he was talking directly to me. So, I mean, it was addressing some of that, you know, church hurt and getting back into church. And he said, come, sit in the back and heal for a year if you have to, or 2 years, or whatever it takes. There's still some hurt there, of course, but, you know, Celebration has healed a lot of that. Getting in and getting connected with different ministries and different people and stuff, and it's been great.
How do you feel like you reached a place of forgiveness?
I think at that moment and after that, I think it was just, I think eventually I did come to the realization that they're flawed men just like I am. And I think that I don't know where their mindsets were at, you know, the associate pastor that never reached back out, or the worship pastor, or any of that. But, you know, I had to come to a point where I had to forgive them to be able to continue to grow in my relationship with the Lord. So I have forgiven them and have moved beyond that.
I was just telling a friend the other day that, you know, just in the worship pastor, you know, the situation with him, for instance, you know, I began to realize that I don't know the inner turmoil that he was experiencing. You know, I don't know what was going on in his own life. And so I began to feel more compassion towards him. And, you know, sin against another is wrong. There's no excuse. It is wrong. But I can have compassion on him and forgive him. And so that's what I've done.
So what would you guys say to someone out there who's watching this who has experienced church hurt? What advice would you give them on what are some first steps that they can take to find healing?
Well, for one, just remember that the flaws of man, it's not God, it's man. And they're completely separate. You know, I mean, So men are going to let you down, but God will not.
I think the biggest thing for me finally was coming to that realization that we needed to find a good Bible-believing, loving church. And that was key for me because I carried that anger for several years. So, and that I think is the biggest thing, is just finding, that right pastor, that right church, that right body of believers to help that healing.
Yeah, I think you guys touched on some really crucial stuff when you said that men will make mistakes, but men are not God. Humans, we mess up, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what God has done towards us. I think especially where we're at in the Bible Belt, there can be this idea or thought process of comparing a pastor to God or putting them in such high regards that you expect them to be perfect. But it's such a mystery that God trusts humans to be in charge of his church on earth. If I was God, I'm like, that sounds like a pretty bad idea. But for some reason, he has done that. And just as none of us are perfect and we're going to make mistakes, we're going to get it wrong, that's going to be the same case for people in church leadership or other members of the church that we're around. We are all still humans. We are all still being made into the image of Christ. And that means there's stuff in us that is not Christ-like. So I think that's a very important thing to remember. And I think forgiveness is the key. Bitterness and unforgiveness can blind us and chain us in so many ways. I think having those two realizations are important things. And forgiveness doesn't mean that what they did was right.
Exactly.
When God forgave us, it wasn't him saying, wow, every sin you've ever committed, it was okay. It wasn't that bad. You're good. And it was
right.
No, I died for your sin so I can forgive you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it's extending that same grace towards them. So
absolutely. And as far as disobedience, because we're commanded to be a part of the body, I think that's so important, that community, what we're talking about now, and at church, it's so important. And just because, maybe there is something wrong in a church, maybe there is something spiritually, deep going on, but it doesn't mean that we should look at every church like that, and we did that. That's what we did. He was done all together. And, but the Lord has redeemed it, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for Celebration, and that the Lord placed us there, and he has grown. I'll speak for myself, but just he has grown me so much in my faith, in freedom. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be a part, and how grateful I am to the Lord just for the things that he has shown me during these 2 years at Celebration, because he's definitely opened my eyes and my heart to a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Tony and Robin, thank you guys so much for sharing your story. It is truly our heart's desire that you guys will be able to find healing in this, and we just pray that in the name of Jesus that you would be able to receive the grace and the strength to forgive and to step into healing, and that God would open doors for you to find a healthy place to heal, and that he would bring redemption to whatever church hurt experience you have walked through.